Basketball fans, Deshaun Tate back with you, unless you've been living under a rock. As I always say, you know what this is. Tate's Take, the podcast, the best, the most entertaining, the most informational, and the most educational. Don't forget that part. Basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. Be sure to go and subscribe everywhere and anywhere that you find your favorite podcast. And also make sure that you follow along on all social media platforms. That is at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS, hashtag where basketball lives. And as you know, I always tell you, don't save it for the local barbershop. Don't save the conversation for the local sports bar. We talk about it here on Tate's Take, where everybody has a voice. Everybody feel free to chime in, as you can see there at the bottom. Feel free to comment below with questions and your opinions and so forth. Streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, also on Twitch as well. Something new and something different for the people. So I do appreciate you guys for coming through and showing some love. And without further ado, because one thing that I don't get an opportunity to do nearly enough of is talk a little bit about the West Coast, talk a little bit more about West Coast basketball, Pac-12 basketball, USC basketball. So I definitely want to take out some time and make some opportunity available in order to do so. And without further ado, I want to make sure that I get ready to bring my guest in here because you know what? I've been following this guy for a while, and he's always doing a good job retweeting my content, me retweeting his, and so forth. And the guy that's put us together, TJ Reeves, very, very thankful and grateful for him to be able to connect us both. So I want to be able to bring in. There we go. Trying to put all the pieces to everything together. Matt Zemek, I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. College basketball writer and editor from USC Trojan Wire. Make sure you give this guy a follow at Matt Zemek. That is at Matt Zemek, MATTZ, as in zebra, EMEK. Matt, how are you doing? I guess early morning for you. You're up bright and early before the roosters get clucking and everything because you're over there on the west.
That's right. Gotta get my Trojans Wire content ready to go, scheduled, posted for the day. So yeah, I'm a morning person.
No doubt, no doubt. I want to start off with this one first because this is the obvious one. Talking about the Wild Wild West, obviously in that West region. Number 6 seeded USC taking on number 7 seeded Oregon. That's going to take place on tomorrow, 9:45 p. Of course, Eastern Standard Time, 6:45 p. Pacific on TBS. I think that should be probably the last game of the day. What is your overall outlook? I guess yeah, because that's the last one that's going to be played. That's the last one to actually advance on to the Elite Eight. What is your overall outlook on this particular matchup, very briefly, before we start getting into the nuts and bolts of it?
So it comes in a fascinating context because, first off, for people who haven't followed the Pac-12 closely and haven't followed these teams, Deshaun, USC didn't have Isaiah Mobley in that game on February 22nd, their one meeting during the regular season. And Oregon guard Will Richardson was well below 100%. He was injured for a good portion of the year. Dana Altman needed time to integrate him fully into the lineup precisely because of that injury. It just wasn't 100%. And without him, the Ducks were missing a piece. So he's 100% now. So those are two very big plot points heading in, and it means that this matchup is going to be very different from the first one on both sides, not just Oregon. The other thing is that matchup on February 22nd occurred with Oregon playing a lot of games in a short period of time because Oregon, you might recall, had 2 COVID pauses during the season, so the Pac-12 had to reschedule games in the second half of February. So Oregon had a Colorado-Utah home swing and then had to fly to LA for a Monday game. And then the Ducks had to go straight to the Bay Area to play Stanford and Cal. the Ducks were in the midst of a lot of basketball. They had to travel, and usually in the Pac-12, you're playing Thursday, Saturday. The Ducks had to go to LA on a Monday, and they didn't seem to have their legs. And USC blitzed them in the first few minutes, got up big early, and really, frankly, cruised throughout. So very different situation in Indianapolis. Oregon has not been playing a lot of ball, played just one game because of the VCU COVID pause. So the Ducks are going to be very physically fresh. And it's not as though USC won't be, but Oregon worn down in that first game. We should see a lot more energy from Oregon this time. So it's a very different context. That's the thing that people really need to know about this game. There isn't a lot that people should take from that first game. This second game should play very differently.
Very interesting, because I didn't think about that at the time at first, and maybe who was out and how the COVID affected, how close that was to the game being played and so forth. Let me ask you this, because USC, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're the biggest team in terms of size, of height rather, in the country. Certainly within what's remaining in the NCAA tournament, where Oregon is not nearly that as much, especially without the big man in Tate, who saw very limited action this year as well because of injuries, amongst other things. So how does that, who do you think gets the best of who in that situation? Because you're a little bit more guard oriented, or big guard oriented when you're talking about Oregon, but then you got size all across the board for USC. Styles make fights, all that good stuff. How do you determine this thing unfolding, I guess?
Yeah, so USC's length, there's no question it bothered Oregon in that first game on February 22nd. But I think one could make the argument that USC's quick start was more about the Trojans' energy. And keep in mind that in that game, USC had just lost at home to Arizona 2 days before on Saturday. And it was an unexpectedly bad performance by USC's defense. USC had won either 6 or 7 straight games heading into that Arizona game. And that Arizona game was a departure from what we had been seeing in terms of USC's defense this season. USC allowed Arizona to shoot above 50% from three, allowed 81 points. It was just a bad performance. And I mean, not like an unacceptable performance, but just after a few weeks of winning, USC lost focus, maybe assumed that its talent could just automate out. And that was a moment when Andy Enfield had to whip his guys into shape, saying, hey, you need to put forth the effort. You just saw against Arizona what happens when you let down your guard. So that Arizona game was kind of a teaching tool heading into the Oregon game. And you saw USC play one of its 2 best games of the year, the other one being the one we just saw against Kansas. But that game against Oregon stands out for USC in that it was a complete 40-minute defensive performance. And with USC's defense, it's obviously a very good defense. I would stop short of calling it a great defense because we haven't seen USC play a lot of 40-minute defensive games. The real virtue of USC's defense is that in the last 6 to 7 minutes of close games, it has been tremendous. I've written a lot at Trojans Wire this season documenting the many times that we get to the 7-minute mark of regulation and then USC clamps down in those final 7 minutes. But in terms of playing all 40 minutes, that has come and gone. That's been hit and miss. The Oregon game and the Kansas game were the 2 times USC put all the pieces together. And with these longer breaks between games in the NCAA tournament, I'm not talking about the timeouts. I'm talking about just the days between actual games because of the COVID protocols. USC should be physically fresh. So while Oregon's going to be physically fresh, USC, if it plays a complete 40-minute game on defense, that could be the trump card in this matchup. That's what the Trojans are hoping for. You saw Oregon dismantle Iowa with all of their guards, throwing in threes, playing in rhythm. So Oregon would love to get this game in the 80s. USC would love to keep this game in the 60s, muck it up, make it a rock fight, use that length as a disruptor. That's going to be one of the things to watch on Sunday night.
And everybody's kind of been talking about the job that Andy Enfield has done from a recruiting standpoint, paying a lot of attention to Evan Mobley and so forth. But he's been putting a couple guys in the league here in Atlanta, where I am. You've got Oyika Okongwu, in addition to Kevin Porter as well, being another one of those names, just to sprinkle a couple of them throughout. What do you make of some of these comments? I was watching the post-game press conference from the last game, the blowout over Kansas. I mean, somebody asked me on the air just for the last couple of days who's been looking the most impressive. I mean, if you wrap the napkin around your neck on Kansas and pretty much wipe the floor with them, it's going to be really hard considering program prestige and everything else to not give them the nod there. But what I do want to ask is, I've had the opportunity after that game to check into the post-game press conference, hear a couple quotes from Isaiah Mobley, who was there up on the podium, and just kind of want to get your thoughts on some of the things he mentioned. That being him saying that he feels like the Pac-12, and not only the Pac-12, but that the USC Trojans has been disrespected. They're definitely playing with a chip on their shoulder, saying that they beat Oregon earlier in the season, but Oregon stole the conference championship away from them. Besides mentioning that he dedicated that win, that the win has been dedicated to a deceased father, and I think that that is Andy's father. I'm not quite sure of that, so don't quote me. But I think the last
Yeah.
part of that was uh, that he is aware that people have called this team undisciplined. It seems like they're definitely hearing some of the rumblings and reading some of the newspaper clippings and so forth. What do you make of some of his comments in that post-game presser?
Well, first off, before the Kansas game, Isaiah Mobley said, we feel that if we're playing our best, no one can touch us. And then USC slaps a 34-point beatdown of Kansas. So Isaiah backed up his talk in this NCAA tournament, and he obviously feels he can back it up again a second time. In terms of the stealing the Pac-12 title, Oregon stealing the Pac-12 title, I mean, USC has not won a Pac-12, back then Pac-10 title since 1985. So it was a really big goal. It was very much within reach, and USC loses it not by a large margin, but by percentage points. Because remember, USC played a full 20-game Pac-12 schedule. Oregon played only 18 games. So USC finished 15-5. Oregon finished 14-4. So percentage points. They were both 10 games over 500, but it was decided by percentage points, and Oregon having one game in the loss column. So if you're a USC fan, and keep in mind, these two teams had a controversy in football where Oregon didn't even win its division, but was allowed by Larry Scott to play in the Pac-12 football championship game against USC. USC went 5-0 in Pac-12 play. So there was a heated debate that Oregon shouldn't even have been allowed to play USC in the Pac-12 football game, but Oregon the game in a highly controversial decision, and then Oregon beat USC. So people around USC already feel that Oregon stole the football title, and that might have been where Isaiah Mobley was coming from. Like, why is it that Oregon got to play two fewer Pac-12 basketball games and won the conference title? Because one of the games Oregon did not play, which was scheduled, was a game at UCLA. So that was a game Oregon very easily could have lost. And so if Oregon, had played that UCLA game and had won it, you might not have Isaiah Mobley saying Oregon stole it from USC. But because Oregon played those two fewer games, didn't have to play it in Pauley Pavilion, there is a feeling around USC, and it's completely understandable that no, the Ducks got a really lucky break again, not just in football. So that's part of the backdrop to that. But ultimately, USC was in the Pac-12 lead, and there was really just, USC played 20 games in the Pac-12. The one Pac-12 game, which really was an unacceptable performance, the game that is going to be hard for this team to forget, especially if it loses to Oregon on Sunday. If you beat Oregon on, you can say that you're the best team in the Pac-12 for this season. This is kind of a grudge match, like a deciding match of sorts. But if USC loses to Oregon on Sunday, the one game USC is going to look back at this season and regret is the loss at Utah, on February 27th, because USC was still in the lead. Okay, just got kicked around by Colorado, USC's nemesis. Colorado went 3-0 against USC this past season. So losing to Colorado in Boulder, hey, that happens to just about everyone in the Pac-12, including Oregon, deal. But USC had always previously bounced back from any bad performance. We already talked about playing the great Oregon game 2 days after the Arizona loss. But in this one time, USC did not respond well to a loss, scored only 61 points. Evan Mobley made only 2 field goals. It was the worst performance of USC's season, given all the other circumstances. USC lost at Oregon State in January. What the Beavers are doing in the NCAA tournament has certainly made that loss look a lot better. But the Utah loss in late, that is the one game which really sticks in the craw of every USC fan and player. And if USC had won that game, it would have won the Pac-12. So as much as Isaiah Mobley wants to say that Oregon stole it, USC gave it away with that game at Utah.
Makes a ton of sense. And I'll say this much as well on top of that. Just some of the crazy, whether it be storylines or just the quirky way that this thing has worked out, I'm seeing here. I'm like, wow, you've even got some within the Pac-12 anyways, like what's remaining is the rival schools. You've got Oregon and Oregon State, ironically, still in this thing. You've got USC and UCLA still in this thing. And crazy also to think that you've got a Loyola Chicago team that has knocked off 2 conference tournament winners already in the ACC with Georgia Tech, and then in the Big Ten with Illinois. Now they've got another conference tournament winner up against them on their hands coming up this weekend in the Sweet 16 in Oregon State. In the locker room right now, episode 71, Matt Zemek. Man, this dude knows a ton. He's all over his stuff. Make sure you give him a follow. College basketball writer and editor for USC Trojan Wire at Matt Zemek on social media. I want to throw a couple questions out here at you. We'll do a little bit of rapid fire before we get you up out of here. I like to play. You know what? Let me ask one more question actually before we play a little bit of that rapid fire. What would you say? This is perfect. What do you believe that the outlook should be for the Pac-12 going forward? They've got 4 teams in. That's a quarter of the teams that are still remaining in the Sweet 16. Something that not a lot of people seen coming. I know that us over here on the East Coast, with Deshaun Tate being the rare exception, that really doesn't get a chance to A or B care very much to stay up at that late at night to watch these Pac-12 teams. How surprised should people really be by the statement that the Pac-12 has made in the NCAA tournament this year? And what should we look forward to going forward?
Well, you know, this is a tricky one, because let's say that Oregon State lose. That means that, you know, 3 of the 4 Pac-12 teams will be out before the Elite Eight. And then whoever wins the Oregon-USC game gets to play Gonzaga. So that's going to be a tough ask. So, I mean, UCLA is an 11 going up against a 2, Alabama. Oregon State's going up against a really red-hot Loyola Chicago team, superbly coached by Porter Moser. I mean, you figure that the Pac-12's magic's going to run out. So if the Pac-12 loses 3 teams in the Sweet 16, people might say, oh, well, maybe it really wasn't underrated after all. Here's the thing. The underrated to begin with. I didn't hear anyone on Selection Sunday saying, oh, Colorado needed to be a 4 seed or USC was underseeded. I think USC's seed of 6 was pretty much on the dot. I think that USC was playing Colorado in the Pac-12 semifinals for that number 5 seed. Colorado won that game. Colorado got the 5. USC got the 6. I think that was all seeded perfectly. I think if there was one seeding question, it was that Oregon maybe should have been a 6 instead of a 7. But really, that's pretty small potatoes. I didn't hear anyone saying that Oregon State was going to get on a run. Like the Oregon State-Tennessee was the one you thought the 5 would actually win. Because Winthrop, UCSB, and I'm mind blanking on the other one, Georgetown, those were the sexier 12/5 upsets. Oregon State-Tennessee was the game you thought form was going to hold. And, you know, Oregon State's been great. But, I mean, no one saw Oregon State beating Cade Cunningham and Oklahoma State. People were waiting to see Oklahoma State play Illinois in what was going to be the best Sweet 16 game of them all. and that got dashed from both sides. So, the thing about underrating the Pac-12 league, you have to be talking about it before it happens. You can't just talk about it after the fact. Like if you entered the NCAA tournament saying, "Hey, the Pac-12 is really good," then you have the right to claim it was underrated after the upsets happen. But I didn't hear any chatter about Pac-12. The Pac-12 was about to make a statement. No one was saying that. So the Pac-12 has already had a very successful NCAA tournament. Losing in the Sweet 16 won't change that now, and we just have the news that Craig Smith of Utah State job. So that's an upgrade for Utah. And Utah, of course, under Rick Majerus, made the national title game in 1998. I mean, obviously that was before the Pac-12, but nevertheless, Utah has a rich basketball heritage. So if Craig Smith makes Utah really good again, that should be a plus for the Pac-12. Utah and Stanford used to be NCAA tournament regulars, and Utah's made just 2 NCAA tournaments the past 12 years. Stanford's made just 1 NCAA tournament the past 13. So you think that in terms of the Pac-12 future, Deshaun, if you get those rocking and rolling again, because they should be good, Utah and Stanford ought to be good. So it seems as though Utah is on the path. Stanford not yet, but at least getting Utah back to regular NCAA tournament status. You get the Arizona mess hopefully sorted out, and you might have 6 or 7 teams in the NCAA tournament regularly. That's where the Pac-12 should be, and then you can really do an excellent job. And with USC, this is a great year for USC to make its first Sweet 16 in 14 years, because with the transfer portal being so big, number one, let's keep in mind that Andy Enfield surrounded Evan Mobley with a lot of transfers. Tajidi, transfer, Santa Clara. Drew Peterson, transfer, Rice. Isaiah White, transfer, Utah Valley. Enfield put a lot of effort into the transfer market, and he didn't get big names, but obviously he's given Evan Mobley the complementary pieces to have a full functioning lineup. So Enfield has a great chance now off this Sweet 16 to say, look, you're a transfer, you can join elite recruits and special. He has a great recruiting tool. So USC is really in position to kill it on the transfer portal. And if that indeed happens, USC might be able to be entering a golden age in men's basketball. USC has made 3 straight NCAA tournaments only once in its history. Enfield has won 4 NCAA tournament games at USC. That's first all time. No other coach has won 4 NCAA tournament games. That tells you how much USC basketball has suffered over the years. Position to be better. Utah's in position to be better. Oregon State's in position to be better. This NCAA tournament run really is lifting a lot of boats in the Pac-12.
I love the non-bias. I love the honesty. You could easily get on here and talk and flex your Pac-12 muscles so easily if you wanted to, but you're being honest about what the conversation was prior to the NCAA tournament, what it currently looks like in that landscape of the NCAA tournament, and even furthermore going into the next year. Man, y'all make sure I'll give this dude a follow. I told you he was going to be a great guest. Matt Zemek, let me go ahead and switch us over now to our quick release segment. It is essentially like a rapid fire in a roundabout way. Okay, very trying to be as brief as possible. We got quite a few of these in mind. So let's start out with, let's see where I want to go. Let me see if I can find something hard for my boy Matt Zemek, something difficult rather. Let's go with, Let's play a little fill in the blank, Matt. Fill in the blank. Nobody's talking nearly enough about blank. That could be a player as it relates to the Pac-12. As it relates to the Pac-12. It could be a player. It could be a team, whatever you will. Who is it that nobody's talking nearly enough about?
Dana Altman, and that could apply to pretty much any year. If he was at a blue blood program, he'd be a rock star.
Interesting. Let's go some keys to victory for tomorrow's game. USC against Oregon again, number 6 seed. USC and Oregon a 7 seed.
It's going to be the 3-point line. Whoever can get a noticeable advantage at the 3-point line wins. I mean, if USC gets at least one shooter to knock down shots, then Oregon has to extend its defense. Evan Mobley can feast in the paint. And conversely, Oregon did not shoot the three well against USC in that first game. LJ Figueroa was 4 of 6, but his other teammates were 3 of 11. You need to see Chris Duarte. You need to see Will Richardson get in the act from 3.
Interesting. Let's go. Who do you think that the X factors is for each of these? You know what? Let's go all 4 Pac-12 teams on this one. Who do you think the X factors are for those teams? And in the event that they contribute accordingly, then they can maybe be advancing to the next round.
Okay, Oregon State, Roman Silva going up against Cameron Krutwig. He has to do well in his matchup. You know, you saw Krutwig outplay Kofi Coburn, which is a pretty impressive statement. So hold his own against Krutwig. UCLA, Alabama, I think it's Johnny Juzang that he's the guy who can just go off. And if he lights it up, that opens up everything else for UCLA. In the USC Oregon game, Eugene Omoruyi for the Ducks, because you know that the guards are going to be good, but Omoruyi has to be good in the paint against the Mobleys. So he has to hold his weight there. And then for USC, I'm going to go with one of two. It's either Ethan Anderson or Drew Peterson. I mean, you know the Mobleys are going to be good. Taj Edey's probably going to be taken because he scored 24 in the first game, so Oregon's going to focus on him. So Peterson or Anderson has to step up, mostly on offense, but also playing perimeter defense. They both have a huge role for the Trojans.
Interestingly enough, let's go. Your most anticipated Pac-12 Sweet 16 match is not USC or Oregon.
Well, I mean, Oregon State Loyola is a fascinating game, and Wayne Tinkle has Chicago roots, so that keeps it in like an all-Chicago battle, even though he's representing. But it's hard to turn down UCLA, Alabama. I mean, Mick Cronin has never gotten past the Sweet 16, so anytime he gets to the Sweet 16, that's a big event. And if he can pull that upset, you can really entertain visions of UCLA becoming, you know, an elite team, an elite program once again in the 2020s. So UCLA, Alabama, that is a very sexy matchup.
Never thought in my life we would ever have to say UCLA once again. Never thought that we'd have that much space in between at one point in time. But nonetheless, give them credit. They've certainly been taking care of business, playing an extra game. No complaints over here, and no complaints from them either. I do a little something called a chalkboard question of the day. It's kind of similar to the one that we did a little bit earlier. It's also another fill in the blank. So we'll do this one. It wouldn't surprise me if we see blank this weekend. What is that blank?
Well, you know, I'm a USC blogger, and I'd certainly want to see USC win. It's good for business, as they say, but I think it wouldn't surprise a very tough three-point shooting night against Oregon. USC has not been a good three-point shooting team for most of the season. That 11 of 18 you saw against Kansas, that was definitely an outlier. I mean, Isaiah Mobley had never made 4 three-pointers in a game until the Kansas game. Isaiah White had made 3 three-pointers only one game before the Kansas game. That was on January 7th. So that was an outlier three-point shooting game for USC. And my main concern as a USC blogger is that the Trojans are going to hit a rock. They're going to crash into the shore. They're going to have a bad night. It would not surprise me, though. They've been living right in the NCAA tournament thus far.
Let's do 3 more with you here, Matt. Let's go flying under the radar. Which player has improved in the pack that's still remaining of all of the Pac-12 teams? Which player has improved their draft stock the most?
You could go different directions with him. You could say Ethan Thompson of Oregon State. You know, this has been a breakout NCAA tournament for him. Johnny Juzang or Jaime Jaquez for UCLA, both been absolutely outstanding for the Bruins in this tournament. With Oregon, you know Duarte is going to be there. I think that Will Richardson coming off the injury, playing extremely well against Iowa, that he would probably be the choice for the Ducks. And then Isaiah Mobley for USC, stepping out to three-point range, showing more versatility in his offensive game. You know, he's a good solid defender, has been all year, but he's gaining confidence at the offensive end, and that is certainly improving the ceiling of his potential.
Let's give a little bit of a letter grade here. I'm going to ask you for 2 letter grades. From Andy Enfield, what letter grade do you give him from the time that he stepped onto campus all the way up to leading up to the NCAA tournament? And then what letter grade do you give him for his performance during the NCAA tournament?
I would say, in terms of his USC tenure before the NCAA tournament, I think he was a solid B+. His offenses would crumble in February. Pac-12 coaches would read his offenses like a coloring book. That was the really big limitation for Andy Enfield. But he's taken USC to 4 NCAA tournaments in 6 seasons. And 2020 USC didn't play. No one played. But USC was going to be in that tournament. So we count that as an NCAA bid. It's not an appearance, but it's a bid. And no previous USC coach had earned 4 NCAA bids in a span of 6 seasons. So he's clearly improved the program, and he deserved to be a B+, even with limitations, but he didn't get an A precisely because of those offensive limitations. But in this NCAA tournament, A+. I mean, USC routed Drake, allowed just 19 points in the second half, took away Joseph Yesufu's legs. He was being asked to play extended minutes because Drake had a couple injuries, didn't have Roman Penn in at point guard, so Yesufu had to shoulder the burden, and USC took away his legs over 40 minutes. Is exactly how USC needed to play that game. And then, hey, you deal Kansas a 34-point loss in the NCAA tournament. Got to be an A+ tournament specifically for Andy Enfield.
Last but certainly not least, how many Pac-12 teams do you anticipate going to the Final Four?
I'd love to be able to say that the Pac-12 will be represented there, but the matchups don't work. Loyola Chicago and Porter Moser, that's a roadblock for Oregon State. Alabama's playing excellent ball under Nate Oates. And then the USC Oregon winner plays Gonzaga. I mean, those are just roadblock draws for each of the Pac-12 teams. They just don't have brackets. UCLA, Deshaun, you know this. UCLA was an 11 seed in 2015 and played a 14 seed in the second round that year. That was UAB. UAB beat Fred Hoiberg and Iowa State. So, UCLA, these runs usually end in the Sweet 16 as a double-digit seed. UCLA is not in that Jim Boeheim-Syracuse category, being able to make a run to the Final Four. So the paths aren't very good. But again, if it all comes crashing down in the Sweet 16, it's still a wildly successful NCAA tournament. Got a lot of win units, a lot of crucial revenue. There's going to be a new commissioner in July replacing Larry Scott. So things actually are looking up for the Pac-12, even if, all of the teams lose in the Sweet 16.
I hope the people feel educated now, something that they can kind of look forward to, seeing these Pac-12 teams, what to expect and so forth, and really looking forward to the games for them this weekend, upcoming weekend for Sweet 16. Matt Zemek, college basketball writer and editor for USC Trojan Wire. Remember, give him a follow. I don't want to hear anything else about people saying you don't talk nearly enough about, the West Coast and California and USC and LA and UCLA and all this and that. You don't bring anybody on. We don't get any guests. Now you got it. And I promise you, there's not going to be any need to bring on another person to talk about college basketball on the West Coast. I can promise you that right now. Give him a follow if you don't believe me. On Twitter, at Matt Zemek. That is at MATT. Z as in zebra, EMEK. Matt, thank you so much for joining the program, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you again for all that you do all across the board and just the contributing to college basketball coast to coast and just retweeting my content and just everything all across the board, all your contributions, man. Really appreciate it.
Keep up the outstanding work, Deshaun, and thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next time, man. That's my dude, Matt Zemek, that joined us, and really grateful and overly thankful of him joining the program on today, and appreciative of all of you out there who are joining the program as well. For those of you who have already subscribed, about to subscribe, will subscribe in the future, won't hear this until later, appreciate you as well. Anywhere that you find your favorite podcast, Tate's Take the Podcast. Just hover over that search box, the little search engine, a little magnifying glass up there. Tate's Take, put it in there. We call it the best, the most entertaining, the most informational, the most educational basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. So don't save it for the local barbershops. Don't save it for the local sports bars. Go and tell everybody that you know to go and subscribe. You're doing this guy a huge, huge favor when you're doing that, making just more dreams come true. We can all use a little bit more of that. And I'll even support some stuff that you got going on as well, becoming a subscriber and so forth. Just let me know. So make sure that you go and subscribe. I always tell people, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your mama, tell your grandmama, you guessed it, and tell your baby mama, to where they can find the podcast there. Remember to follow along as well on social media at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS. Again, you know that that's where basketball lives. It only lives in one place, and that's at Tate's Take. So appreciate everybody for chiming in, as well as to Matt Zemek. Thank you so much for your contributions to the program on today. Overly thankful and appreciative of that. Dallin Cuff is going to be coming up, I think, next week on Wednesday, ESPN analyst. We've got Tim Brando that's going to be joining us next week as well before we get out of here and go up to Indy for the Final Four. So make sure that, listen, you guys know that you never know what you're going to get on this program. We've brought on Dan Dockich. We've brought on Fran Fraschilla. We've brought on Jay Billis. We've brought on Seth Greenberg. And I don't want to just throw a lot, because we've had some really, really good people that maybe does not have those names. We've also brought on some good people to talk some college basketball as well. So I'm not singling out, but you just never know who you're going to get a guest right here on this program. It's time for Sweet 16. We're like T minus, what time is it? Okay, so yeah, I guess we're at 2 hours and 14 minutes until game one of the Sweet 16. Looking forward to it. Let me get out of here so I can go and get me one of those large pizzas, one of those meat lovers large pizzas, little extra cheese on it, and some breadsticks and some sauce and so forth. So looking forward to that. Appreciate you guys for chiming in. Looking forward to you guys joining me on the next one. Peace.